Hello! Welcome to our channel. Today we have an inspiring story full of life lessons to share. If you enjoy meaningful content, leave a like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion means a lot to us. Let's get started with this touching narrative.
The soft morning breeze of a hot summer day blew through the open window of Carlos Ventura's grand office. The sun shone directly on his face, lighting up the luxurious surroundings, filled with modern designer furniture and expensive paintings on the walls. The view from the window, stretching out towards the horizon of New York City, revealed the chaos of the city. People rushing by, cars honking, the typical frenzied scene of one of the world's largest metropolises. But to Carlos, all of that felt distant. He could no longer concentrate on what was important. Carlos rose from his black leather chair and walked over to the window, looking down. Below, the city pulsed with life. People moved along with their daily routines, indifferent to the emotions that were tormenting the millionaire at that moment. He took a deep breath, as though trying to push away the last traces of frustration that had built up over the years. Lara, his wife, was at home waiting for him. Not that he had any great expectations for what awaited them. Their marriage had become a series of silences, of lukewarm conversations and empty gestures. He didn't want to admit it, but the truth was brutally clear. The marriage, which had once been a partnership of dreams and promises, was now fading for one reason: the absence of children. Carlos and Lara had tried everything. For years, the couple had gone through expensive treatments, therapies, consultations with the best specialists. She endured those painful needles, hoping that one day the pregnancy test would show the longed-for positive line. But it never came. Lara could not conceive. And that gnawed at their relationship. Carlos felt the pressure building year after year. He was not just a successful businessman. He was someone who believed having a family with children was a natural extension of the success he had worked so hard to achieve. For him, a successful company, a huge house, and a beautiful wife were not enough. He wanted to be a father. He wanted heirs to the empire he had built with so much effort. On that particular day, something snapped inside of Carlos. He could no longer handle the emotional toll of watching Lara try and fail every day. He had a new vision, a new need in life. What he didn't realize at that moment was that his narrow view of life was pushing him toward an irreversible decision, a decision that would change their lives forever. As he looked out at the city below, Carlos felt a tightness in his chest. He knew he was about to do something that could change everything. There were business plans, yes, but his mind was elsewhere. Lara. On what he had decided to do. It's time to end this. He thought without hesitation. There was no room for doubt. The decision had already been made. Lara was at home as usual, waiting for him to return from work. She always waited for him like a devoted wife. But unlike Carlos, she still held on to a quiet hope. A hope that somehow, things could go back to how they were at the beginning of their marriage. When Carlos looked at her with admiration, when she was still the woman he desired. However, Lara already knew something was wrong. Something had changed in her and in him too. She felt it in the air. The growing distance between them. She wanted to ignore it, but she no longer could. When Carlos arrived home that night, the silence between them was heavier than ever. He entered the living room and sat down on the sofa. Lara, who was in the kitchen, felt an eerie sense that something big was about to happen. She knew this wouldn't be just another night. "Carlos, what happened?" she asked, entering the room with a faint smile, trying to appear normal. But she knew it wasn't normal. He looked at her with a cold gaze, as if observing something distant, something that no longer belonged in his world. It was the first time she saw Carlos with that look. "Lara, I don't know what to do anymore." He spoke in a low but firm voice. I feel like, can't go on like this. Lara swallowed hard. Her heart started to beat faster, but she didn't know whether to directly ask what he meant. There was something heavy in the air, something she already suspected but feared to hear. Carlos. What are you saying? She asked, trying to remain calm. He stood up and began pacing back and forth, as if trying to organize his thoughts. Lara watched him, waiting for some explanation, but nothing came. I can't wait anymore, Lara. He finally said, the words coming out harsher than she had imagined. I can't live like this anymore. We can't keep trying. He paused, as if searching for the right words but couldn't find them. I want a family. I want children. I can't stay with someone who can't give me that. Lara froze. His words sliced through her like a knife. He wanted children, yes, but not with her. She, who couldn't give him what he desired. The emptiness of what he had said echoed inside her. Carlos, are you serious? She asked, her eyes welling up with tears, unable to believe what she was hearing. He didn't respond immediately. He looked at her, his eyes cold, and then he spoke. Yes, Lara. I'm sorry, but I can't stay here. It's not fair to you or to me. You deserve someone who can give you what you want. I'm leaving. His words reverberated in Lara's mind, but she couldn't process them. He was leaving. He, the man with whom she had shared so many dreams, so many moments, was now saying he couldn't continue with her because of something beyond their control. Lara felt the world crumble. You are leaving me because I can't get pregnant. Her voice trembled, full of pain. Carlos didn't respond, but his look said it all. He had no more hope. She was no longer what he wanted. I need someone who can give me children, Lara. That's what matters to me now. He turned his back and walked toward the door. Lara stood there, paralyzed, feeling the weight of humiliation and loss. He was leaving. She tried to convince herself that perhaps this was for the best, for both of them. But deep down, she knew she would never be the same. He was abandoning her for something that was beyond both of their control. When the door closed behind him, Lara collapsed onto the couch, tears streaming down her face. She tried to calm herself, but the pain of rejection was unbearable. She knew life would go on, but a part of her would never be the same. And so, Carlos Ventura left, in search of something he believed would make him happy. And Lara stayed, with a broken heart, waiting for what the future held for her. She still believed in some kind of new beginning, but she knew that day would change their lives forever. The pain of that night still echoed in her chest, but life, as always, would continue its course. Lara woke up to the soft sound of rain tapping against the window. The gray autumn morning mirrored her state of mind. She looked to the side of the bed where Carlos used to sleep, and a sharp pain shot through her chest. The emptiness he had left felt like an impossible void to fill. But the reality, no matter how difficult, imposed itself. Carlos was no longer there. He had left, and his departure marked the end of one phase of her life. She slowly got out of bed, her body heavy and her thoughts scattered. His decision had been made abruptly, with no more explanations than what he had already given her. Lara knew there was no turning back. He had left her because she couldn't give him children. It didn't matter that she had tried everything, undergone tests, gone through invasive treatments. The pain of infertility was a constant shadow in her life, but she never imagined the rejection would come from the one person she loved most. As much as she tried to convince herself that her happiness didn't depend on Carlos's approval, his abandonment still cut deeply. With him, she had been a passionate, devoted woman. Without him, she felt lost, as if she no longer knew who she was. Carlos had left her coldly, without caring for the love she still held for him. That hurt more than anything else. Lara descended the stairs of the large, silent house. The mansion felt empty, and not just physically. She had grown used to Carlos's presence in every corner, to his laughter, to their conversations about business and dreams. Now, everything seemed to have crumbled. She had so much to rebuild. She went to the kitchen and made herself a strong coffee. The warm aroma filled the space around her soul, but it did nothing to alleviate the pain deep within her being. She sat at the table, gazing out the window, fogged by the rain. She knew she had to do something. Sitting there in her pain wouldn't fix anything. She thought of her mother. Donna Teresa had always advised her not to depend on a man for happiness. But in practice, Lara had always believed that her happiness was found in Carlos's company. Now, with him out of her life, she would have to learn how to be happy on her own. Lara stood up, decided to take a warm shower, and put on a simple yet elegant dress. She wanted to feel different, to not let the weight of sadness consume her entirely. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a woman who, despite the pain, still had the strength to fight. She knew the future wouldn't be easy, but one thing was certain: she wouldn't let life crush her. The decision came suddenly, but Lara felt it was the right moment to begin again. She would make a radical change. What remained in New York now seemed like a distant memory of a time that could never return. She would sell the house, move to a new city, and start over. She didn't want to live in the shadows of what had been. She wanted to rewrite her story. A few weeks later, Lara was on her way. Moving to a small town in Massachusetts felt like the right choice. She found a simple yet charming house in the center of a town called Brookfield. The place seemed calm, far from the chaos of New York City, and offered a sense of renewal. Lara needed peace, something she knew she wouldn't find in the hustle and bustle of a big city. The house was cozy, with a wildflower garden and a porch that overlooked a quiet street lined with tall trees swaying in the wind. Lara knew that here, she could begin to rebuild her life. When she arrived at the place, she felt for the first time in weeks a sense of relief. It was as if the quiet landscape was a metaphor for her own journey of healing. In the first few days, she focused on settling into the house, organizing the things that had been left behind, and making the space her own. Over time, she met a few friendly neighbors, people who, unlike in New York, were willing to listen and offer support. One of them, Mr. Harold, was a kind, elderly man who lived next door. He invited her to have coffee on his porch, and that small gesture was enough to make Lara feel that, finally, she was in the right place. As the months passed, Lara managed to adjust to her new routine. She began working as a teacher at a local preschool. Although the work was challenging, it was fulfilling. Lara had always had a knack for working with children, and over time, she realized she could turn her pain into something positive, helping other women and children overcome their own struggles. But despite the satisfaction her work brought her, there was always a void in her life. She still missed the idea of having a family, of being a mother, and the absence of children still weighed on her shoulders. It wasn't easy to see other women pregnant or with small children, but she learned to cope with it. In a corner of her heart, she held on to the hope that one day she would find true happiness, but she knew it would be a long and difficult road. In her free time, Lara dedicated herself to volunteering in the community. She helped organize fundraising events for local organizations and spent long hours reading books and doing sewing projects. Something had changed in her. She no longer saw herself as Carlos Ventura's wife, the woman who depended on a man to feel whole. Now she was Lara by herself, a woman seeking independence and inner strength. And so, one spring afternoon, Lara met Rose, a woman who became her closest friend in Brookfield. Rose, who had lived in the town for years, was a therapist with an office where she helped people going through difficult times. She quickly realized that Lara was carrying a deep pain, and the two began talking about what had happened in New York. Rose helped Lara understand that, although the end of her marriage with Carlos had been painful, it was also an opportunity for her to reconnect with herself and find true happiness. Rose became an important support in Lara's life, offering advice and a listening ear whenever she needed it. However, despite all the support she was receiving, Lara couldn't deny that she still felt something for Carlos. He would always be a part of her, A chapter in her life that, although painful, would never be forgotten. She still wondered what might have happened if he had been more understanding, if he had been more patient with her. But over time, Lara learned to accept that his decision had been made, and she couldn't change it. What remained now was to move forward and find herself. The healing process was long and challenging, but Lara felt she was finally freeing herself from the pain of the past. She knew that what Carlos had done wasn't something she could change, but what she could change was her future. And with that in mind, Lara began to look at life with a new sense of purpose. Meanwhile, deep down in her soul, one question still lingered. Would fate ever make her cross paths with Carlos again? But that was something she didn't have an answer to. She knew, however, that regardless of what happened, she had taken the first step in her journey of self-discovery. And that was the most important thing. Lara's new beginning was just beginning. The first few months in Brookfield had been peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos of New York. Lara had settled into her new life as a teacher at the local preschool, and though it hadn't been easy, she felt a sense of pride in her work. It was more than just a job. It was her way of rebuilding, of finding new purpose in the midst of heartbreak. Still, the quiet town, with its cozy streets and familiar faces, held a strange kind of tension for her. She had left everything behind, but sometimes, late at night, she would lie awake and wonder if she had made the right choice. It was during one of those sleepless nights that the phone rang. The shrill sound broke the stillness of her room, and for a moment Lara froze. She wasn't expecting any calls. As she reached for the phone, her heart skipped a beat when she saw the name on the screen. It was from an unknown number. Hesitating, she let it ring a few more times before answering. "Hello." Her voice was tentative, unsure. A deep, familiar voice greeted her on the other end. "Lara, is this you?" Her breath caught in her throat. It couldn't be. There was no way. "Carlos," she whispered, the name falling from her lips like a forbidden prayer. "Yeah," he said, his voice tense. "It's me." Lara's heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to process the sudden wave of emotions that rushed over her. She hadn't heard from Carlos in over a year. The abruptness of his departure still felt like a fresh wound, and yet here he was, calling her out of nowhere. Why are you calling?" Lara's voice shook, but she couldn't help it. Her feelings for him hadn't vanished. Not completely. Even after everything, a part of her still cared. Carlos let out a sigh, one that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 regrets. "I know I don't deserve to ask for your forgiveness, Lara. I don't know where to begin, but I need to explain. I've been thinking about you. About everything. And I think about the decision I made. And how it changed everything." The raw honesty in his words stunned Lara into silence. She hadn't expected this. Not after everything he had done. Her mind raced, conflicted between the pain of the past and the longing for answers that had always been left unanswered. "Why now?" Lara finally managed to ask, her voice trembling. "Why are you reaching out now?" Carlos paused for a long moment. She could almost hear the sound of him gathering his thoughts, struggling with the words he was about to say. When he spoke again, it was with a tenderness that shocked her. "I never stopped thinking about you, Lara. I know I hurt you. I know I abandoned you, but something happened that changed everything. I found out something about myself. And about us." The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. Lara's chest tightened. "What do you mean? What happened?" I'm sorry, but I need to see you. I need to explain everything in person. It's complicated. I should have been there for you, and now I need to make things right." Lara felt a wave of anger mixed with confusion and disbelief. After all this time, after he had left her without a second thought, he was asking to see her, to explain. It didn't seem fair. But despite everything, there was a part of her that still wanted to know the truth. She had tried so hard to move on, but the unresolved question of what had happened between them lingered like an open wound. "Fine," she said, her voice steady but cold. "Come to Brookfield. I'll meet you tomorrow." She hung up the phone, her hands trembling as she put it down on the table. Her heart was racing. She wasn't sure what she was feeling: anger, confusion, or even a flicker of hope. What had Carlos been thinking all this time? And why was he coming back into her life now? The next day, Lara spent hours trying to calm herself. She had no idea what to expect from this meeting. Was he truly sorry for what he had done? Or was this just another selfish attempt to ease his own guilt? She couldn't make sense of it, but the curiosity gnawed at her. She had to know. When Carlos finally arrived, it was in a sleek black car, far from the man she had once known. He had always been polished, put together, but now something about him seemed different. He wasn't the confident, distant man who had left her. Instead, there was a vulnerability in his eyes that she couldn't quite place. He stepped out of the car and walked toward her with tentative steps, as if unsure of what to say or how to act. Lara stood by her porch, arms crossed over her chest, waiting for him to speak. She refused to make it easy for him. "Lara," he said quietly, his voice full of regret. "I don't even know where to begin." "You can start by telling me why you left," Lara replied, her voice sharper than she intended. "Why you abandoned me without even looking back. Do you think you can just walk back into my life and everything will be fine?" Carlos winced, but he didn't try to defend himself. Instead, he nodded slowly. "I deserve that." "You do. And you're right to be angry. I was wrong. I made a decision that I thought was the right one, but I was wrong, Lara. I hurt you and I can never take that back. But I need you to understand. I wasn't running from you, I was running from myself." Lara felt a strange pang in her chest at his words. She wasn't sure whether to feel compassion for him or anger. But there was something in his eyes that made her want to hear more. "Running from yourself," she echoed, confused. Carlos took a deep breath, as if trying to find the courage to say what he had been keeping buried inside for so long. "I found out that I'm the one who's infertile. It wasn't you, Lara. It was me. I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know how to face the reality that I couldn't give you the family I had promised. So instead of being open with you, I shut you out. I ran away." Lara's heart sank. The words took a moment to sink in. For all this time, she had carried the burden of feeling like she was the reason their marriage had fallen apart. She had believed it was her fault, that she was broken. And now, here was Carlos, confessing that it wasn't her. It was him. Her thoughts were a whirlwind. She had spent so much time hating herself, believing she was unworthy. But now the truth was so different. She could feel a mix of relief and betrayal swirling inside her. "You didn't think to tell me? You didn't think that maybe we could have faced it together?" she asked, her voice trembling. Carlos lowered his head. "I didn't know how. I thought I was protecting you by leaving. But now, all I can think about is how much I hurt you." The silence between them stretched long, and Lara felt her emotions tugging her in different directions. There was so much anger, but also a deep sorrow. A sorrow that she had tried to bury for so long. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer this time. "I wish you had told me. I wish we could have faced it together, but you made a choice. You walked away from me, Carlos. And that's something I can never forget." Carlos nodded. "No. And I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve that. But I hope you can find it in yourself to understand why I did what I did." Lara was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he had said. She had thought she was ready for this moment, but now that it was here, she realized that the healing process was far from over. Carlos had shattered something in her that would never be the same. She couldn't just pick up where they had left off, no matter how much she might have wanted to. "I need time," she said finally, her voice firm but not unkind. "I need time to think about everything you've said." Carlos nodded again, his face filled with regret. "I understand. I'll give you all the time you need, Lara. I just needed you to know the truth." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Lara standing on the porch, her heart heavy with a truth that had been hidden from her for so long. As he disappeared down the street, Lara felt a wave of sadness wash over her. But amidst that sadness, there was a glimmer of something else. something like hope. The past had hurt her deeply, but maybe, just maybe, the future could hold something different. But that was a question for another day. For now, she just needed to breathe. The days that followed the conversation with Carlos were a blur of conflicting emotions for Lara. Her mind kept replaying the words he had spoken, the confession about his infertility, the admission of his abandonment. Part of her wanted to scream, to throw everything he had said back in his face. But another part of her, the part she had kept buried for so long, felt a pang of sympathy. Was it possible that Carlos, too, had been suffering all this time? That he had been too afraid to face the truth with her? Lara knew she couldn't make any decisions in the heat of the moment. She had spent so long rebuilding herself, so long learning how to be strong on her own. She wasn't sure if she was ready to let Carlos back into her life, even if he had changed, even if he was no longer the man who had left her without a second thought. The next morning, Lara woke up to the sound of birds singing outside her window. The sun was breaking through the clouds, casting a soft, golden light over her small house in Brookfield. It was a quiet morning, the kind she had come to appreciate in her new life. But today felt different. Today, she knew she had to make a decision about how she wanted to move forward. After a long walk through the town's quiet streets, Lara found herself at the local park. The cool breeze ruffled her hair, and she sat down on one of the benches, staring out at the small pond in front of her. She had always found peace in nature, in the simplicity of the world around her. Here, away from the noise of New York, she could think clearly. The pain of the past was still there, but the overwhelming weight that had once defined her life was now a distant memory. It wasn't long before Lara's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Rose. "I know you've been through a lot recently, and I just want to remind you that I'm here if you ever need to talk. You've come so far already, and I know you'll continue to grow stronger with each day." Lara smiled softly at the message. Rose had been a constant source of support, someone who had encouraged her to keep going even when it seemed like the world was falling apart. Rose's words were a reminder of how far she had come since that painful day when Carlos had walked out of her life. Lara took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. She knew it was time to stop looking back. The past couldn't be changed, and holding on to it would only hold her back from the future she deserved. She picked up her phone and typed a message back to Carlos. "We need to talk. But I can't promise anything. I've spent too long letting you shape my life. Now it's time for me to focus on me. Let's meet in a few days." With that, she hit send, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, Lara felt in control. She wasn't waiting for Carlos to make the decisions for her. She was taking charge of her own life, her own future. That evening, Lara decided to take a step further into her new life. She spent the night preparing for her first solo art exhibition. The idea had been in the back of her mind for months, a way to showcase her own work, to prove to herself that she had more to offer than just the woman who had been married to Carlos Ventura. Art had always been a quiet passion of hers, something she had kept hidden while she was focused on building a life with him. But now it was her time to shine. The following evening, Lara arrived at the local art gallery. The walls were adorned with vibrant colors and thought-provoking pieces from other local artists. The gallery was modest, but it was exactly what she needed. As she walked through the space, her heart fluttered with excitement. This was it. This was her new beginning. She set up her own corner, where a collection of her paintings, each one reflecting her emotional journey, would be displayed. There were landscapes that reflected the serenity of her new life in Brookfield, portraits of women that conveyed strength and resilience, and abstract pieces that captured the turmoil she had once felt in the darkest days of her marriage. When the exhibit opened to the public, Lara was overwhelmed by the positive response. People were drawn to her art, asking questions, commenting on the emotions that poured out of each piece. She had never felt more alive, more connected to herself. For the first time, she realized that her art was more than just a hobby. It was a reflection of her soul, and she was sharing it with the world. But even amidst the success of her exhibit, her mind kept drifting back to Carlos. What did he want from her now? Why had he reappeared after all this time? Lara knew she couldn't continue to avoid him forever, but she didn't know if she was ready to open her heart again. She had learned to live without him, and she wasn't sure if she could go back to the uncertainty that had once defined their relationship. The night of her exhibition, after the last guest had left and the gallery had quieted down, Lara sat alone in the gallery, reflecting on everything she had accomplished. She felt a sense of pride that she had created something from her pain, something that was now part of her new identity. She wasn't the woman who had been abandoned anymore. She was Lara, a woman with a story, a woman with strength, and a woman who had fought for her own happiness. But as the clock struck midnight, Lara received a message. It was from Carlos again. "Need to talk. Can we meet? I've never stopped loving you, Lara. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can be the man you deserve." Lara stared at the message for a long time, the words echoing in her mind. She had been waiting for a moment like this. For Carlos to take responsibility for his actions, for him to admit that he was willing to fight for her. But now that it was here, she wasn't sure what to do. She had worked so hard to build a life without him, a life that was hers alone. She had fought to reclaim her identity, to find peace within herself. And now, with Carlos's return, everything was being called into question once again. Lara took a deep breath and stood up, her hand resting on her heart. She knew what she had to do. She wasn't going to let Carlos define her future. She wasn't going to let his past mistakes overshadow the strength she had built within herself. In that moment, Lara made a vow to herself. She would meet Carlos, but it would be on her terms. She would listen, hear what he had to say, but she would no longer allow him to control her happiness. The next step in her life would be hers to choose. Tomorrow she would face Carlos. And whatever came next, she would be ready. Her journey had only just begun, and she was determined to live it on her own terms. The morning air in Brookfield was crisp, the kind that carried the scent of fresh rain and the promise of a new day. As Lara stood in front of her small cottage, taking in the quiet beauty of the town, a sense of calm settled over her. It had been a week since Carlos had reached out to her, and every day she had carefully considered what to do next. Her mind was torn between the past and the future, between the woman she had become and the person she had once been with him. Today was the day she would face him. She had told herself that meeting him wouldn't change anything, that her life had moved on, that she had built something new, something meaningful. But deep inside, a part of her still carried the ghost of the man she had once loved. She couldn't simply erase him from her heart. The love she had felt for Carlos was not something that could be so easily discarded. The meeting was set for the cafe in the center of town. It was a small, cozy place, with mismatched chairs and hand-painted tables. The kind of cafe where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and the hustle of life outside seemed miles away. Lara had chosen it deliberately. Public place. No private corners for old emotions to resurface uncontrollably. She needed clarity. She needed to hear him out, but she also needed to be in control of her emotions. As she walked through the cobbled streets towards the cafe, Lara's heart beat faster. Every step seemed to carry her further back into the past. She told herself to breathe, to stay calm. But as she reached the door, her hand hovered over the handle for a moment longer than she intended. The sound of the bell chiming as she entered was almost surreal, a small reminder that she was about to face something she had never truly prepared for. Carlos was already sitting at a corner table by the window, his back to the sunlight. His dark hair, now slightly graying at the temples, seemed to catch the light in a way that made him look older, more worn than she remembered. And yet, the same piercing gaze that had once captivated her was still there. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment they both froze. It felt as though time had stopped, that the world outside had faded away. All that remained was the two of them, the woman who had loved him and the man who had abandoned her. Carlos stood up slowly, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of hesitation and longing. His voice was quiet when he spoke. "Lara, you came." His words were almost a whisper, as if he was afraid to disturb the fragile atmosphere between them. Lara nodded, not trusting herself to speak just yet. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of facing him. They sat down at the table, the silence between them thick and heavy, filled with the weight of everything they had once shared and everything that had since been lost. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Lara could feel the old emotions stirring within her. The love, the hurt, the anger. They were all there, tangled together in a storm that she wasn't sure how to navigate. Carlos had always been a man of few words, but today, it seemed like even those few words were beyond him. Finally, Carlos cleared his throat, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know you probably hate me, Lara. And I deserve that. I hurt you in ways I can never take back. I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know that I regret everything. Leaving you. Not fighting for us. I was a coward." Lara felt a flicker of something inside her. Was it regret? Pain? Or was it simply the raw honesty in his voice that caught her off guard? She had heard apologies before, but this was different. It wasn't the rehearsed, superficial apology of a man trying to make himself feel better. It was a raw admission of guilt, and for a brief moment, she felt herself softening just a little. But then the walls went up. She couldn't let herself forget everything that had happened. The heartbreak, the loneliness, the years of longing for a family that never came. The bitter taste of rejection was still fresh in her mouth. She wasn't sure if she could trust him again. Was this a genuine apology? Or was it just another attempt to win her back for his own sake? "Carlos," she began, her voice steady but cold. "I don't know if I can believe anything you're saying anymore. You walked away from me when I needed you the most. You chose to leave because I couldn't give you children. You made that decision for both of us. And I never even got the chance to explain." Carlos's face tightened with guilt, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong. And I hate myself for it. I should have been patient. I should have understood. But I let my pride and my fear control me. I thought that having children was the only thing that would complete me. And I was too selfish to see that I already had everything I needed in you." Lara's breath hitched in her chest. His words hit a nerve, but at the same time they felt too little too late. How could he possibly understand the pain he had caused her? How could he understand what it had been like to carry that weight alone, to try so hard to meet an impossible standard? "I didn't need you to make me feel small, Carlos," Lara said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I needed you to be there. I needed you to be the partner you promised me you'd be. But instead you left. You chose to abandon me when I needed love, not judgment. Do you understand what that did to me?" Carlos's eyes filled with regret, and for the first time, Lara saw a flicker of the man she had once known, the man she had loved. It was a painful reminder of what they had once shared, and a painful realization of how much she had lost. "I understand now," he said softly, his voice breaking. "I see how much I hurt you. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for that. But I know I can't change what happened. I can't take back the years I wasted." Lara took a deep breath, pushing back the tears that threatened to rise. She had never allowed herself to cry in front of him. It had always been a sign of weakness, a sign that she hadn't moved on. But this moment felt different. She felt vulnerable, exposed, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel the hurt she had buried for so long. She looked at Carlos, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision she had to make. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Carlos. I don't know if I can let you back into my life. I've spent so much time rebuilding myself, so much time learning to stand on my own. I don't know if I can go back to the way things were." Carlos nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to forget what I've done. I just want you to know that I am here if you ever need me." Changed Lara. "I'm not the man who left you. But I'll respect whatever decision you make. I owe you that." The silence between them stretched on, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Lara knew this moment was crucial. It was the moment where she had to decide whether or not she could let go of the past, whether or not she could take a step forward, with or without Carlos. As the conversation ended, Lara stood up, her heart torn between the love she once had and the woman she had become. She had heard him, but the question still lingered in her mind. Could she ever truly forgive him? Could she ever trust him again? For now, Lara wasn't sure. But she knew one thing for certain. She had survived without him before, and she could do it again. The future was hers to shape, and for the first time, she was ready to face it on her own terms. It had been months since Lara's meeting with Carlos, and life in Brookfield had returned to its familiar rhythm. The quiet town, with its slow pace and charming little streets, had become a haven for her, a place where she could rebuild, reflect, and begin to understand the woman she had become. Her heart, though scarred by the past, had started to heal. The pain of Carlos's betrayal was no longer an open wound, but a scar that reminded her of her strength. Her days were filled with teaching, community work, and, most importantly, self-care. Lara had learned that happiness was not something to depend on another person for, but something she could cultivate within herself. She found solace in her small victories, helping a child overcome a learning obstacle, organizing a successful charity event, or simply enjoying a quiet evening with a good book. Yet, even in her newfound peace, there was always a shadow in her heart, a lingering question. What if there was more to the story? It had started as a whisper, a passing thought, but over time it grew louder. She had moved on from Carlos, or so she thought. But something about his last words haunted her. "I've changed, Lara. I'm not the man who left you." His apology had been sincere, but deep down, she knew he had still been holding something back. The more Lara tried to bury the memory of their conversation, the more it resurfaced. There was a truth she hadn't allowed herself to hear, a truth she didn't want to acknowledge. But her intuition nagged at her relentlessly, like a thread she couldn't untangle. One chilly morning, while Lara was walking to the local cafe to grab her usual cup of coffee, she saw a familiar figure standing by the sidewalk. It was Carlos. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment she hesitated. Why was he here? He had promised not to interfere in her life anymore, that he would respect her decision. But there he was, standing as if no time had passed. His posture was different, though. No longer the cold, calculated man she had known, but someone who seemed weighed down by an invisible burden. Lara's steps slowed as she approached him, unsure of what to say. They had shared a painful farewell months ago, yet here he was, an unexpected presence in her world once again. "Lara," Carlos said softly, as though he had been waiting for this moment. "I need to talk to you. There's something I haven't told you." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. The silence between them was thick, the kind that seemed to pull the world in close. For a moment, Lara wasn't sure if she was ready to hear whatever secret he was about to reveal. But her curiosity, mixed with a nagging sense of unfinished business, urged her to listen. "Come with me," he suggested gently, nodding toward a quiet bench under a large oak tree by the park. They sat down, and Carlos took a deep breath before turning to face her, his eyes serious. "Lara, when I left you, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was being selfish, but I also thought I was being practical. I wanted to build something, a legacy, and I couldn't do that without children. I thought I needed an heir to carry on my work. But what I didn't realize was that I was chasing an ideal, a dream of perfection, while abandoning what was real, you." Lara's heart tightened, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "After I left, I couldn't move on," Carlos confessed. "I thought I could find happiness elsewhere, start fresh with someone else, but it wasn't right. Every relationship I tried felt like an echo of the one I had with you. I couldn't shake the emptiness I felt. And then something happened. Something I never saw coming." Lara's brow furrowed. What could he possibly be talking about? "There's a woman," Carlos said, his voice trembling slightly. "Her name is Natalie. I met her a few months after I left. She was everything I thought I wanted, young, vibrant, full of life. She gave me everything I thought I needed, but I didn't realize I was trying to replace something irreplaceable. Lara blinked, her breath catching in her throat. Carlos, what are you trying to say? Carlos hesitated for a moment before continuing. Natalie, she's pregnant. And the shock, Lara, is that the child, it's mine. But that's not the whole truth. The real truth is that Natalie, she wasn't just some fleeting affair. She had been trying to have a child for years, and when we first met, I had no idea she had fertility issues as well. And we tried for a baby together. But there's more. Lara's head spun. She didn't know what to think. She had never imagined Carlos would come back into her life, let alone with a story like this. I'm sorry, Carlos whispered, looking down at his hands. But after we found out she was pregnant, something didn't add up. The doctors called me in to talk, and it turns out the reason Natalie got pregnant so quickly was because of an old fertility treatment she had tried years ago. She had used a sperm donor. Lara's eyes widened. What? Carlos nodded, his gaze never leaving the ground. The child isn't mine, Lara. It's from the donor. I was never meant to be part of this, not in the way I thought I was. And the worst part is, I was so blinded by my own arrogance, my own desire for an heir, that I never saw how precious what we had together was. I thought having a child would fill a void, but it only made the void bigger. The truth is, I've never wanted anything more than I wanted to build a family with you. But I let my fear take that away from us. Lara sat frozen, her mind racing. Carlos was telling her everything he had hidden from her. The lies, the manipulation, the selfishness. But there was something else beneath it all, something that tugged at her heart. Carlos was broken, and in his brokenness, he had finally realized the truth. He had chased the wrong things for so long, convinced that wealth and legacy would fill the emptiness inside him. But it was love, family, and understanding that he had been missing all along. I don't know what to say, Lara finally whispered. You've destroyed everything we had. Carlos nodded, tears welling in his eyes. No. And I'm sorry. I wish I could go back, but I can't. All I can do now is tell you the truth. I'll never ask for your forgiveness, Lara. But I wanted you to know that you were everything to me. You still are. Lara's heart ached. She wasn't sure what to feel anymore. This man, the one who had left her shattered, was now seeking redemption. She could see it in his eyes, the same desperation that had once led him to make the worst decision of his life. But now, it was tempered with remorse, with the realization of just how much he had lost. I have to go, Lara said softly, standing up from the bench. I need time to think. I don't know what to do with all of this. Carlos didn't stop her. He watched her walk away, his heart heavy with the weight of the truth he had laid bare. As Lara walked through the park, her mind was in turmoil. The future was uncertain, and the past was complicated. But one thing was clear: the road to healing was not a straight line. It was filled with twists, unexpected turns, and moments of clarity. Lara didn't know if she could ever go back to the life she had imagined with Carlos. But for the first time in years she felt free. The truth had been revealed, and now it was up to her to decide what to do with it. The future was hers to shape, and with each step, she was getting closer to understanding that she didn't need Carlos to define her happiness. She had already built her life, and it was enough. And as she walked away, the weight of the past slowly began to lift.